First, I thought it was just me being forgetful. I'd come back into the kitchen after a few hours of work and the light would be on. But I'm usually so caught up in the grind that I shrugged it off. Maybe I'd left it on earlier. Easy mistake, right? Happens to everyone. But then it happened again and again. The kitchen light on every time I walked in. And not just the kitchen, sometimes the bathroom, sometimes the hallway. I started being more aware of my actions, making sure I switched things off when I left a room. But it didn't matter. The next time I came back, they'd be on. I started to doubt myself. Was I just getting old and forgetful? Or was something else going on? Maybe a glitch with the wiring. I tried not to think about it too much. It was probably nothing. That's what I kept telling myself. Then came the sounds. It was around midnight, and I'd just finished a late-night project. My eyes were tired, and I could feel the strain from staring at the screen for too long. I'd made a cup of tea, chamomile, because I was trying to sleep better, and sat in my living room just letting my mind drift. The air in the apartment felt still, heavier somehow. I hadn't opened the window all day, and the heat had settled in like a weight. I heard it then, soft, like tapping. Light, rhythmic, almost too faint to notice at first. I paused, setting down my mug. It was coming from the kitchen. My heart skipped. It couldn't be, could it? Maybe the pipes, old and creaky, shifting with the change in temperature. I told myself it was that. Just old pipes. But the tapping continued. Steady, deliberate, like fingers drumming on the counter. I stood up, walking slowly toward the kitchen, my pulse racing, but when I stepped into the room, it stopped. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of the fridge and the low buzz of the fluorescent light above. I stood there for a moment, straining my ears. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that I was being ridiculous. I turned the corner and saw the kitchen light on again. It was like a punch to my stomach, but I didn't let it show. I flicked the switch off, trying to ignore the knot forming in my chest. I'm sure I turned it off earlier. Maybe it was a short in the switch. Maybe I just forgot again. I'd check the wiring tomorrow, make sure everything was okay. It had to be something simple. The next morning, though, the fear started to creep in. The tapping again, faint but unmistakable. But this time it was coming from the walls, behind the kitchen cabinets. I froze. I could feel my throat tighten, my breath quickening. It was so strange, the sound. The walls in this apartment are thin, but this felt wrong. Like someone was inside them, knocking. I grabbed my phone to call maintenance, but hesitated. What would I even say? Hey, I think there's someone living in my walls? They'd probably just laugh at me. I tried to shake it off. I tried to distract myself, going about my day, working, ignoring the gnawing feeling in the back of my mind. But as the days wore on, the taps came more frequently. Always when I was alone, always when the air felt thick, heavy. At night, I started leaving the lights on. All of them. The bathroom, the living room, even the hallway light. I wanted to feel like I wasn't alone, like there was some shield around me. And every night the lights would be on again when I returned to a room. Not just the kitchen, sometimes the bathroom, the bedroom. It felt like someone was watching me, waiting for me to slip up, to forget. I started checking everything. The locks, the windows, the door frame. Nothing was out of place, but I was starting to see things. Or think I saw things. A shadow in the hallway, a glimpse of movement in the corner of my vision. I'd turn around quickly, and there'd be nothing there, but the dread lingered. It was growing, that gnawing sense that something wasn't right in my apartment. It wasn't just the lights, the tapping, or the shadows. It was the feeling that something was here with me, that I wasn't alone. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. My thoughts were fraying, unraveling, but I told myself I was just tired, that I needed rest. I tried to call friends, tried to get out of the apartment, but every time I left, the moment I returned, the lights were on again. The tapping was louder. The walls seemed thinner, closer. Last night, it happened. I woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. I could hear the tapping. It was all around me. The walls, the ceiling, the floors, everywhere. And then, something worse. A voice. A whisper. So faint I couldn't understand it at first, but then it was clear. "Come closer." I froze, staring at the ceiling, wide-eyed. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't in my head. It was real. I wasn't imagining it. I pulled the covers over my head, shutting my eyes tight. I told myself, this isn't real. It can't be. But then the lights flickered, just for a second. And when they came back on, the figure was standing at the foot of my bed. I didn't move. I couldn't. My heart hammered in my chest. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight, my mouth dry. It stood there, still, silent, waiting. And then in a voice so cold, so empty, it said my name, my real name, the one no one calls me anymore. And that's when I realized I hadn't been alone for a long time. I don't know when it started exactly, but looking back, I guess I should have noticed sooner. I live in a small town, the kind where everyone knows everyone and everything seems to move at a slower pace. It's the sort of place where the only excitement is the occasional car crash or a big storm. Mostly, it's quiet, and I liked it that way. I'd spent years in the city and the chaos started to wear on me. So when I found this tiny little house, halfway between town and the woods, I thought, why not? The house is old, really old, but charming in its own way. It has that creaky floorboard charm, the kind that lets you know the place has been around for generations. I'd been living there for about 6 months when things started to get weird. It was the little things at first, like the smell. I could never quite place it, but it lingered, musty and faintly sweet. Not unpleasant, just there. I'd leave for work in the morning and it would be gone. But when I came back at night, it'd be waiting for me again, like an old friend. I told myself it was just the age of the house. Old wood, maybe. Mold, possibly. But it never felt like something I needed to worry about. Then, I started hearing things, at night, the floorboards creaking as though someone was walking around upstairs. But I lived alone. I knew I was alone. And yet, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the slow, deliberate steps above me. Always at the same time, around 3:15 a.m., every night. I'd get up thinking maybe I'd left something on, maybe the wind was pushing something across the floor. But nothing. Empty rooms. The first time I called my neighbor about it, she laughed it off. Old houses, dear. They do that. But it didn't feel like the house creaking. It felt intentional. Like whoever was upstairs was waiting for me to notice. I stopped calling her, stopped telling anyone. I was starting to wonder if I was losing it. Then, one evening, I came home and noticed something different. The door was slightly open. I know I locked it. I always locked it. I checked the locks religiously, maybe even out of habit, because I lived alone and I didn't trust that anyone else would. But this time, the door was cracked. Just enough that I could see a sliver of darkness inside. My heart skipped, but I pushed the door open. Nothing seemed disturbed. Everything was exactly where I left it. But the air, it felt off. Heavier. I shook it off, told myself I was just paranoid, and went about my evening. But the next night, the door was open again. By then, I had to admit I was scared. I checked everything. The locks, the windows, the back door. I checked my phone to see if I had missed any notifications or if I'd forgotten to lock it in a rush. Nothing. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but the thought of explaining what I was afraid of felt too ridiculous. That night, I stayed awake. Not out of choice, but because I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of break-ins, burglars, intruders. I almost convinced myself that maybe someone was sneaking into my house while I was out. Maybe it was just a glitch. Maybe I was letting my anxiety get the better of me. But then I heard it again. A voice. Soft. Almost a whisper. I couldn't make out the words at first, but it was unmistakable. There was someone else in the house. I froze. The voice wasn't just a sound. It felt like it was coming from inside me. I could hear it in my head, feel it crawling into my thoughts. Come closer. I should have run. I should have left, but I didn't. I crept down the hallway, my breath shallow, trying to silence the sound in my head. The voice had stopped, but now I could hear something else. A soft shuffling noise, like someone dragging their feet. It came from the kitchen. I stood at the threshold, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The kitchen was dark, the shadows spilling across the floor like liquid ink. And then the light flickered, and I saw it. At first I thought it was my reflection in the window, the one that caught the light just right and made it look like someone was standing there beside me. But when I blinked, the figure didn't move. It was a silhouette, just enough of a shape to make my stomach churn. A person, standing by the counter, but not moving, not breathing. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. The air in the room felt thick and suffocating. And then I heard it again. The voice. "Why did you leave me?" I stepped back, feeling the coldness of the walls pressing against me. I was sure I had locked that door. But now, I wasn't sure of anything. The figure in the kitchen was closer now, standing directly in front of me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I couldn't. The words felt stuck in my throat and I was paralyzed. I couldn't look away. It took a step toward me. And that's when I realized. It wasn't just the figure. It was me. The reflection wasn't just a trick of the light. It was me, but not the way I remembered. The eyes were too wide, the face too pale. The lips were moving, speaking words that weren't mine. "Don't leave," it whispered, the voice colder than ice. I stumbled backward, falling against the hallway wall. My hands were shaking. I knew I had to leave, but my legs wouldn't move. My mind was racing, but all I could think was, I need to get out. I didn't even look back. I ran out the front door, slamming it behind me. I don't know where I went or how long I stayed away, but when I came back in the morning, the house was quiet. The door was locked. The kitchen was empty. The air smelled of dust, of silence. The figure was gone. I should have left, packed my things and left this place behind. But I couldn't. I'm still here. It's been weeks, but sometimes when the night is quiet and the shadows grow long, I can still hear that voice. I can still feel the presence. And sometimes when I look in the mirror, I see it. Myself, waiting for me to turn away, waiting for me to step closer. I don't know if I'm the one who's real anymore. I moved into my new apartment 2 months ago. It's a small one-bedroom on the second floor of an older building, but it's mine. I've always liked the idea of having my own space, especially after a year of cramped shared housing. I figured a little solitude would be good for me. The building's a little worn down, cracked walls, faded paint, but that's fine. It's cheap and the landlord's a nice enough guy, a little too eager to chat when I bump into him, but I don't mind. The neighbors? Hardly ever hear them. It's like everyone's in their own little world, and I like that. Everything was fine for the first few weeks, no major issues. But then it started. Little things at first, so small I could almost pretend I didn't notice. The bathroom light would flicker occasionally, but I figured it was just an old bulb. The sink would gurgle when I ran water, but it wasn't anything worse than I've dealt with before. And then, one morning, I woke up to find the kitchen chair out of place, just a few inches from where I had left it the night before. I don't know why it bothered me so much. I told myself it was probably just me being forgetful. Maybe I knocked it without noticing. But it felt wrong. The next week I came home to find the front door slightly ajar. I know I locked it, I'm sure of it. But when I walked in, nothing seemed disturbed. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. It didn't make sense, but I tried to push the thought aside. I didn't want to be the kind of person who let their imagination get the best of them. But the weirdness didn't stop. It was like the apartment was trying to tell me something. There was the sound of scratching, faint but persistent, coming from behind the walls. It started on the first night, a slow, scraping noise, like something, or someone, was clawing its way through the drywall. At first I thought it was just the pipes or the building settling, but night after night it continued, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was getting closer, that it was coming for me. I tried to call maintenance about it, but when the guy came to check, he said there was nothing he could do.